Boba Fett review. Spoiler warning, I will be talking about specific things that happen in the show, at least some major things that stick out in my mind after watching the show for the first time. And that's, just to be clear, how I do my kind of review system is I have my spoilerless review, where I do very surface level, just skim the concept of the show, and then I have this review where I talk about specifics after watching something for the first time, maybe second time or something like that. When I'm not incredibly familiar with the work, I just talk about my thoughts, but just talking about specifics as well. And then for some things that I plan to do, I haven't done any yet, but when I do a deep dive is where I'm going to actually script out the video and really dig in deep, watch the whatever it is many times over, analyzing things, really dig in and try and understand why it is the way it is. And I just kind of wanted to clarify that since I'm doing another spoiler-filled review, and I've only done one of those before, which was for the Eternals after I watched that movie. So yeah, we're back at it with the Book of Boba Fett. So again, to be clear, spoiler warning. There's a spoiler warning for this video. I'll be talking about some specific scenarios. I like the character of Boba Fett. I do. I also like the whole idea of him becoming the ruler of Tatooine, basically. Not the ruler, I forget what it's called, but what the term that they use in the show, but replacing Jabba the Hutt as the mob boss lead, pretty much, of Tatooine. But he's also trying to rule out of respect as opposed to fear, and he's using honor more than he is just brutality or deceit like someone like Jabba the Hutt would. So I really like that angle on Boba Fett, especially seeing how it shows that he was affected by certain things in his life, maybe his encounter with the Mandalorian, although he seemed to already have changed by that point from what we last saw him a long time ago, obviously, in the original Star Wars trilogy. I mean, lore-wise, that's when we last would have seen him. But also, the whole storyline with the Sand People, I think was really Tuskens. I forgot their name for a second. I think it was a really interesting story, and I liked seeing that whole change happen in Boba Fett. And the ending was really cool, seeing a Rancor, a Rancor fight droidekas, but not like normal droidekas, like artillery-grade droidekas. Like, that was awesome fight scene. And, of course, the elephant in the room, I think, for this whole show would be that the Mandalorian is in it, and seeing him wield the Darksaber. I wanted to see that so badly at the end of Season 2, and I'm glad that I got to see that, though I am curious to hear what some people thought out there who didn't watch the first 2 seasons of Mandalorian and watched the Book of Boba Fett. If you're just like an old Star Wars fan and you were a fan of Boba Fett, so you came in to watch that show, like, what did that feel like for you? Because now we're going to get into some of the negatives. I love the character of the Mandalorian. I love his character development, and I love the fact that they progressed his story in this show. Don't get me wrong, because I am a Mandalorian nerd. I am a Mandalorian nerd. Specifically, the Mandalorian from the show, Mandalorian. But, so don't get me wrong when I say this, but having an entire episode and a half straight, just non-stop, entire episode and a half that is devoted to the Mandalorian storyline as opposed to Boba Fett's storyline in his own show was a bit, it was off kilter with the pacing of the show. It was like, you're building the story of Boba Fett, and I'm getting invested in the story of Boba Fett. And then episode, I want to say it was episode 4? No, it was episode 5, I think, episode 5 out of 7, if I remember correctly, is when they bring the Mandalorian, and that episode is just called The Return of the Mandalorian, and the entire episode is just Mandalorian. You don't even see Boba Fett at all in that episode, and at the end you see, I can't think of her name right now, but the assassin that works with Boba Fett, you see her show up to talk to the Mandalorian at the end of the episode, but that's the only connection. And obviously you knew there was going to be a connection, but it's just, like, in Boba Fett's own show, it's just, he wasn't the star. And that's what it felt like to me in that segment of the story. He wasn't the star. He was in general, but I'm more of a fan of the Mandalorian, the character of the Mandalorian, so shoving him into the Boba Fett show, like during the fight scenes at the end of the last episode, the climax of the whole thing, I was rooting more for the Mandalorian to be the victor, to be the hero of the scenario than I was for Boba Fett, even though it's his own show. So again, presents a problem that there was a whole episode 5 was entirely about the Mandalorian, and then like half of episode 6, the first half, was entirely about the Mandalorian and Grogu and that story, and then we get cut back to Boba Fett and everything that's going on, and then back to more Grogu story, and it kind of flip-flops back and forth from there on until we have everything converging at the end. But it just, I don't know, it was a weird way to pace things out. Again, I don't mind. I love seeing more Mandalorian lore, and I have been craving that, but it kind of shat on Boba Fett a little bit, if I'm being completely honest. And so I think that that is negative points to the show of the Boba Fett show, not because Mandalorian's a bad addition to the show, but because he wasn't a cameo in Boba Fett's show. He was the star of Boba Fett's show for a solid episode and a half plus. I might as well say for 2 episodes. All the footage that it adds up to, and to the weight of the story that the Mandalorian brings, I might as well say it's a solid 2 straight episodes of a 7-episode season that he is the star of the show. That the Mandalorian is the star. He's not just a cameo or a sidekick. He's not a sidekick either, because he actually is the main character of an entire episode of the show, and then some, and more than that. So anyways, it's not... I don't want to like rant about that, because I am so satisfied to see the Mandalorian story progress, and I was a little upset to hear that we weren't getting Mandalorian Season 3, and we were getting Book of Boba Fett instead. So I was hoping that Book of Boba Fett would connect back to the Mandalorian in some way and update us as to what was going on, and it did, more than I expected. I just think that it harmed the show itself, even though it's fan service to people like me who wanted more Mandalorian. Okay, I've talked about that quite enough. Moving on to the next very specific, significant thing, which actually has to do with the same thing. It's part of the Grogu story. Can I just say, I don't know what happened. I really don't know what happened. I'm talking about what I see as the worst part of the Book of Boba Fett. I genuinely don't know what happened, but for some reason, Luke Skywalker is the most boring character I have ever seen in Star Wars. Close to it. In the Book of Boba Fett. His character is training Grogu, and he says everything so monotoned and so just lacklusterly, and like it's not like he doesn't care about what he's saying, but I don't know, it's hard to describe, but it's just like the actor isn't into it at all. And I'm not saying that he needs to be. I would assume Mark Hamill voiced his own character, but I don't know. And I know that it's difficult because they're digitally recreating Mark Hamill's face, which didn't help because his facial expressions weren't any different either. They were generally emotionless for the most part. And there were some parts where it actually worked kind of well, working off Grogu being the child that he is, and Luke being insanely patient and his voice never changing kind of conveyed that in certain parts. But overall, it just conveyed a sense of kind of disembodiment from the Star Wars universe, almost. Like Luke didn't belong there. He was just playing a role that he didn't care about. That's literally what the way he said things felt like, and sometimes the script itself of what he said. And I wonder why that is, because that problem is nowhere else in the show. With no other character, no other dialogue lines. It's only Luke. It's only Luke. I just don't know why. Because he's such a legendary Star Wars character, especially. Why him? Why did his character fall through the cracks in this show? I don't know, that's just a weird thing, but I wanted to address that because that, to me, was the worst part of the entire show. If I had to pick the best part of the entire show before I end this off, to get specifics, I mean, I don't want to say The Mandalorian, because that's complete bias, and I don't think that's even remotely objectively true. I think that the Tusken story is really good. I think that the Cad Bane versus Boba Fett story was really good. I think that there a little bit more could have been done there. It could have been drawn out. The drama between the two of them could have been drawn out a little bit more, being that they are both incredibly legendary bounty hunters. But that might just be something I'm missing because I didn't watch Star Wars The Clone Wars all the way through. I haven't yet, at least. I plan to continue to watch it. But, I mean, you shouldn't rely on people having seen things before when they're watching a show, which is a big flaw with this show. As I already mentioned, you really need to have seen the first 2 seasons of Mandalorian, because they help explain a lot that goes on with Boba Fett. You would probably be pretty confused if you started watching this show outside of the immediate Sarlacc pit scene. Once it goes into the present time, you'd probably be immediately confused if you didn't see the first 2 seasons of Mandalorian. I was trying to say the best thing I could think of about the show, and I went back to negatives, but I think that the best thing that I can think of about the show would be just some of the story arcs within, because there's so many story arcs. Like I said, there's the flashbacks during the first 2 episodes until you get a completion on the Mandalorian storyline, and then you have, or sorry, not the Mandalorian, but Boba Fett's, and then you have the Mandalorian introduced, and then you get swap back and forth episode time, basically evenly split between the conflict with Boba Fett and Mandalorian, and it's just, there's so many stories being told at once. But that being said, if you take out the fluff of each story, being that they are fluff to each other, because they're not particularly prevalent to each other until everything's put together at the end. If you take out the fluff of the stories, the individual stories are actually really, really good. Like, very, very good. I think the storytelling overall was a little janky, but I think the best part was the individual stories being told, like the Tusken story, and the story of Boba Fett learning to live with the Tuskens, and becoming a family with the Tuskens, which actually gave me... I had genuine intense, while watching the show, I had genuine intense relative to watching a movie or a show connection to these Tusken characters, especially that kid. Because they showed mirroring behaviors of him and in some scenes, and of Boba Fett when he was a kid looking to be a bounty hunter. Like, the whole thing was just, it was emotional. And the way that it all ends up happening at the end is, again, it was emotional. And that was a story that affected me. And again, you isolate that from the rest of the show, and it's really good. And you isolate the growing power struggle and the spice trade story of the overall story of that leads to the climax of Boba Fett, and it's a really good story. And then you isolate the Mandalorian's growth story in there, and it's a really good story. Again, all of this stuff. But when you chop it up in so many bits and throw it all in this show at once, like digesting little pieces of each one at the same time, I don't know, it just, for me personally, it doesn't work. That's not objectively a bad thing, it just doesn't work for me. The having everything converge slowly into the same place, it just doesn't work that well for me, personally. I literally just said that. I apologize. I'm repeating myself. And because I'm beginning to repeat myself, I'm going to end this episode. Not this episode, but this video off here. I hope you enjoyed this spoiler-filled review of Boba Fett, the Book of Boba Fett. And thank you for watching. Go do some things that make you uncomfortable, because they will make you more comfortable in your own shoes. And I will catch you in the next one.